Welcome to the ID Den podcast, the show for teachers ready to step outside the classroom and into their next chapter. I'm your host, Charity Bosch, and I know firsthand how overwhelming it can feel to leave teaching behind. Whether you're exploring instructional design, navigating corporate culture, or just figuring out your first steps, this show is your roadmap. Each episode will tackle the real challenges, share practical strategies, and prove that your teaching skills are exactly what the world needs, just in a different setting. Let's turn that classroom expertise into your career advantage. In today's episode, we are going to talk about a common pain point that I see transitioning teachers go through, and I'm calling that industry jargon barriers. There's a very real language barrier that can happen when you are transitioning, especially into a corporate role. And a lot of times that comes out when you start feeling lost when you're reading instructional design job descriptions. You see acronyms everywhere that have no explanation. Once you get that job and you start attending meetings, it can feel like they're speaking a foreign language sometimes. And then imposter syndrome works its way back around and kicks in before you even get started. And this isn't intentional exclusivity. It's not anything with your inadequacy. If you remember, teaching also has a lot of acronyms. IEP, 504, all those sorts of things that other people would come in and have no idea what you're talking about. So it's not exclusive to corporate. It's not exclusive to instructional design. Just every industry and environment usually has its own language. And I have found that even certain organizations have their own acronyms and things that you need to get up to speed on. This is going to hit teachers hard because you're used to your education jargon, and that doesn't translate into the corporate world, and it doesn't always translate into instructional design, even though there might be a little bit of overlap and some familiarity. There's no glossary provided for job postings, and your first day on the job doesn't usually come with a little dictionary that you can use. The acronyms are being used without being spelled out sometimes, so you might hear ARC. Is that ARK, ARC? You're not even sure. And you have that fear of asking dumb questions in interviews or on the job. The real problem is that job descriptions are packed with those undefined terms, and you can't tell which jargon is critical or nice to know. You might feel afraid to apply because you don't understand the requirements because the jargon is used, and therefore you're missing opportunities due to that terminology confusion. You also could be worried about being found out after you get the job in meetings if they start using acronyms and jargon terms that you don't understand. So, the benefit of decoding the corporate speak is to be able to have confidence reading and responding to job postings, to be able to speak the language in interviews and on the job, and understand what the roles are actually going to require instead of just shooting your shot and hoping for the best. It also allows you to participate meaningfully in those meetings once you do get hired. And it's helpful to translate your teaching experience into their terms to make sure that they understand your value. So let's talk about some of the common instructional design acronyms that you will run into and see to make sure that you understand what they mean. The first one is LMS. That stands for Learning Management System. Put simply, this is where courses live. Whether it's e-learning or tracking instructor-led training, most organizations, especially bigger ones, are going to have an LMS in place, and that is where all of the training records are going to be housed. As an instructional designer, sometimes, depending on how big or small the organization is, you're working directly in that LMS. Other times, you're handing it off to an LMS administrator who is then putting your courses in. Another acronym, and this one always makes me chuckle because it's the first one that I heard during my working interview for that first job I got outside of the classroom, and I looked like a deer in the headlights. And that is SME. Sometimes you will hear people say SME. More often, you are going to hear SME, and that is the subject matter expert. That is your content source. That is the person that knows way better than you, but your subject matter expert is going to be the expert of the content, whereas you are the learning expert. So we work very closely with SMEs in building courses because we have the learning expertise, they have the content expertise, and it's a beautiful collaboration, especially if you get a SME. That is easy. Another acronym, actually a couple of them, you might hear ADDIE, ADDIE, or SAM, SAM. ADDIE is an instructional design model. SAM is an instructional design model. You might hear Agile in there. Those are models. We covered all of these in episode 6, so go back and listen if you haven't yet. But those instructional design models also have acronyms that can sometimes make it a little bit confusing. My personal favorite is LLAMA, Lot Like Agile Methodology Approach. And that is specifically Megan Torrance's take on Agile for instructional designers. So again, you're going to hear some of these acronyms, but you will see ADDIE a lot. You will see Agile a lot. You might see SAM. Another one is KPI. Those are key performance indicators. These are the metrics that are used to measure your performance. What are the things that let us know that we are succeeding? They can be used for your personal performance when we think about like performance reviews with your manager. But you are also going to have KPIs for your courses that let you know that the course is working, that there is change happening as a result, that people are completing things. So KPIs, you're going to see them at different levels within an organization. The business as a whole is going to have KPIs. That trickles down to departmental KPIs. That trickles down to individual KPIs. And then you have project KPIs. Another one is ROI, which is return on investment. This is the value. So when it comes to training, sometimes it can feel tricky to prove the ROI, prove that there is value in the training. And my biggest tip for this is to make sure that it's tied to a business metric because you want to see that business metric improving, whether that's going up or down. That depends on the metric. But you want to see that the business metric is improving as a result of training, perhaps among other things as well. But that is how you prove ROI so that you can show your leadership that no, it is worth our time to build this training. This is what I expect will happen. And then here's the ROI that you could expect as a result of this training. Another one is ILT or VILT, and that is instructor led training, virtual instructor led training, if there's a V at the front of it, e learning. That's more of a term. It's not really an acronym, but that's an online-based course. Typically asynchronous. Instructor-led training is typically going to be synchronous. You might have a hybrid. You might have an async component of some sort of e-learning, and then the synchronous component of some sort of instructor-led training. That's all the courses can classify as ILT, e-learning, or hybrid. Another big one, especially when it comes to e-learning, is going to be SCORM or XAPI or Tin Can. Those are the technical standards for course tracking that you export an e-learning from. Most often than not, most organizations are going to use SCORM or XAPI. There's a few other options, but those are the main ones. There's different versions of SCORM. A lot of times, SCORM 1.2 or 2004 is going to be what the organization uses, or XAPI. They're just different ways to track. So I personally like XAPI if I'm working with an LMS that's friendly for it. Not all of them are. Even if they take it, it might not be friendly because it gives you more data. It gives you more details. SCORM a lot of times is they passed or failed. This was their score. Whereas XAPI, this was the question. This is how they answered. This was correct or wrong. This was all. You get more data with it. So those are just the standards that you export an e-learning course from a course authoring tool into to then get the data. An LXP is a learning experience platform, and essentially it's an LMS. It's a learning management system. They've just tried to put a fancier term on it, and they're usually a little bit newer. They focus on more gamification and things that go beyond just taking courses, like discussion boards and leaderboards, and it's supposed to be a whole experience rather than just management. But for the most part, LXP and LMS, they're going to be pretty similar. That's where the courses live. That's where they're delivered. That's where they're tracked. That's where you're going to go to do your reporting. Now, Those are common ID acronyms. Let's talk about some of the corporate jargon that might sound fancy, but it really isn't. The first term is deliverables. You're going to hear deliverables a lot. The deliverables are the stuff you create. So, for an e-learning course, you might have deliverables of a design plan and a storyboard and the SCORM package. Those are just the things that you're creating for the project. So, every project has deliverables. It has a list of things that come out of it. Instructor led, you might have a slide deck, aka PowerPoint. You might have an instructor manual or a student workbook or worksheets or handouts or those things. Those are all the deliverables for that course, for that project. So don't get scared away if you see the word deliverable. Stakeholders, you're going to hear that a lot. Your parents are stakeholders currently if you're a teacher. Your students are stakeholders. Your administration is stakeholders. Stakeholders are just people with opinions about your work. They might have really strong opinions that make or break you, or they might just be someone that you have to take into account, another VP, that doesn't necessarily care. They just are tied to the project because it impacts their department, things like that. You're going to hear bandwidth a lot. That just means, do you have time for this? Do you have bandwidth for this project? No, I don't have time for this. You're overloading me. Or, yeah, I'm in a lull right now. I have bandwidth for that. That basically just means, do you have time to do this? Is this something that we can put on your plate? Circle back. That just means we'll talk about this later. Touch base. That's usually like a quick meeting or check in, or it could be through email. I just wanted to touch base on this project and see what the status is at. That's another common thing that you're going to hear. Synergy. The corporate environment loves this word, and it's super cheesy. Every time I see it, I chuckle in my head, especially if I'm in a meeting. But that just means working together. Are we synergistic? Are we working together well? I don't know why they love that word. It's been latched onto. It just means working together. Low-hanging fruit, another common corporate jargon, makes me roll my eyes, but those are just the easy wins. What low-hanging fruit can we tackle today? What can we get off our plate to make room for the bigger one? On the flip side of that, you might hear eat the frog. Let's eat the frog. Let's tackle the most difficult thing right away, and then we'll get to the low-hanging fruit. So we've got frogs and fruit. I don't know why. Moving the needle. That means making measurable impact. Are we able to move the needle on this project? Maybe it's 20% done. Can we get it to 50% done in the next 2 days? Make measurable, strong impact. Now, there's some phrases that seem like at face value, you understand what they mean, but they could mean something different in corporate, and I want to go through some of those. For example, let's take this offline. That can be said in a meeting. That just means discuss privately later, whether that's virtually, in person, through chat. Typically, this gets said when you're in a meeting with multiple people and it's like, hey, Charity, let's take this offline. That just means let's stop talking about this here. We're wasting everybody else's time and we're going to discuss it privately later. I'll loop you in. That means I'll include you in a communication. I might say that to my boss. Hey, I'm having a really hard time getting to get the review done. I'm going to loop you in and CC you on my next email so that maybe it kicks them in the butt a little bit. Parking lot. That just means topics to discuss later, not the actual parking lot outside. Let's add that to the parking lot. You might have encountered that during maybe some staff trainings and things. Oh, that's a great question. Write it on a sticky note and go stick it on the parking lot chart paper that we have over there. That just means we're not going to discuss this fully right now, but it does need to be discussed. Let's jot that down. Come back to it later. A slide deck, again, is like a PowerPoint presentation, Google Slides. Not entirely sure why they're called slide decks. I think it's just to keep it agnostic to a delivery mechanism, not necessarily PowerPoint. Your company could be a Google company and you're going to use Google Slides instead. But anytime you see slide deck or even just deck, that's basically just a PowerPoint presentation. Deep dive. I want to take a deep dive into this project. That just means more details. They want a detailed analysis. They want to really get into the weeds. You're going to hear into the weeds a lot too. That just means getting super detailed, not high level, the opposite of high level. Whereas high level overview is just surface level summary. Project's on track. We're 80% done. That's a high level overview. A more deep dive might be this specific deliverable is at 20%, this specific deliverable is at 80%, this specific, and you're getting into more of the specifics. So you have deep dive on the opposite, high level. Action items. Those are just tasks that need to be completed. A lot of times, especially I find if you're in a very organized organization, you are going to have at the end of every meeting, you'll go through the action items. So you might have a 30-minute meeting, even if it's a one-on-one with a boss. At the end, you're going to say, okay, the action items from this meeting are Charity, you're going to do X and Y. I'm going to do Z. And then make sure that everybody knows that out of this meeting, this was the outcome that needs something done for it rather than we just discussed it. There are also some ID specific terms that you need to make sure that you know. And a storyboard is one of those. And that is kind of the course outline that you're going to use before building, but it's more than just an outline. So you're actually drafting content. If it's e learning, you're describing or picking, including media, whether that's images or videos or some sort of graphic that needs to be created. So your storyboard is basically your first draft of your e-learning course. Storyboards are typically not used for instructor-led training. They're going to be heavily used in e-learning. I like storyboards. They can come in a few different formats. A lot of times I will use a storyboard that needs to be reviewed by a SME in a Word doc in like a table format where the first column is this is the first slide or the first page. This is what the topic's going to be. This is what the text is going to be. This is going to have an image attached to it, or there's going to be a video. Here's the script for the video, or here's the assessment question. This is the question type. This is the question. These are the answer options with the correct answer. And so it's really planning out everything very detailed before you get to building. It is a lot easier to catch those technical errors with a SME and a storyboard and make those changes in a Word doc than it is to make the changes later in the course authoring tool, because especially if it's like storyline, it's just more challenging to get the comment made in, we'll say, Articulate Review 360. And so it's easier to get all that stuff in Word. And then the second draft, you could call it, it's the first one in the course authoring tool. Then it becomes more of preference and visuals rather than technical accuracy. Another ID specific term is learner analysis. This just means understanding your audience. I like to build learner personas for my different audiences for a course. Make sure that I really understand who I'm building this for, so I'm not doing things in a way that might frustrate or confuse them. And I'm making sure to include the information that is relevant and necessary for them and not necessarily a different audience. Learning objectives, or my preference, learning outcomes, those should be very familiar to you. That's what the learners should be able to do by the end of the course, right? I can statements. Those things are all learning objectives, learning outcomes. That's one of the terms that does translate really nicely from education into instructional design. Formative versus summative assessment. Also, probably very familiar to you. Formative assessment happens during, and it's to build understanding of where people are at and then provide feedback appropriately and revisit things if you need to, especially instructor led. But e-learning, we do use knowledge checks, formative assessment to kind of help circle people back around. There I am using those corporate terms, and to represent content that might need to be provided again if the formative assessment wasn't great, versus summative after the learning is complete, usually to measure mastery and pass or failure of a course. Scaffolding also should be pretty familiar with you. Building that knowledge progressively. You're doing this already all the time. I am not sure of a teacher I know that wouldn't know what scaffolding is, but in case you're newer or just your district or state uses something different, scaffolding is just making sure that you're providing the supports and then slowly taking them down as you transfer knowledge from you to the learner. Chunking is just breaking content into smaller digestible pieces. So a big course needs to be broken down into smaller pieces to build to success. We call that chunking. Knowledge checks, I mentioned that a little bit ago. Formative assessments, they're just quick assessments throughout the training to just gauge where people are at and what you might need to spend more time on, or what you might need to bring them back to in e-learning, and make sure that they're on the right track for success in the course. Branching scenarios, I call that choose your own adventure learning. If you are as old as me, you might have encountered choose your own adventure books when you were a kid. They were my favorite. You would have a choice to make, and then it would tell you what page to turn to continue. And you can reread the same book several times and get to different outcomes. I love using branching scenarios in learning. It helps people perform and make decisions in a safe environment where I can show them the results of their actions without having anything detrimental happening in the organization. Not every e-learning course is going to need branching scenarios. You can use them instructor-led, a bit trickier when you're working in like a group setting versus one person doing it. But either way, not every learning experience is going to need branching scenarios, but when it does make sense, they can be very powerful, and you might see things like branching scenarios on job descriptions. So let's talk about your strategy to start translating. First, keep a running glossary as you research, as you have meetings, as you look at job descriptions. And I did this when I first started. Every meeting that I attended and that first job out of the classroom, in my meeting notes, I would write down any word or acronym that came up that I wasn't sure what it meant, and I Googled it. Or I asked one of my colleagues if I knew it was an organization-specific term or acronym. But it's helpful to keep that running glossary as you go that you can reference later. Look up terms before you interview. If there's things on a job description where you're like, I don't really know what that is, and you are potentially going to be interviewed about it, you want to make sure you understand. You want to know what an LMS is. You want to know what branching scenarios are. You want to know what ILT means. So make sure that you have the definitions of your glossary terms before you start doing those interviews. Start practicing using your corporate language in your portfolio documentation. So as you're saying, course, this lesson, as you would probably call it, was used with this audience. This was the problem. These were the results. You want to start using, even if it was for a kindergarten lesson on counting, we'll say, you want to start implementing the corporate verbiage when talking about and explaining that lesson. Don't apologize for being new to terminology. A lot of times people are going to forget that that's something that they know because this is what they've been doing, and you haven't been. You're new to this, and they're going to be more understanding. So don't feel like you have to apologize if you don't know what a term is. Ask for clarification when you're genuinely confused and you're not getting any context clues to help you understand what somebody is talking about. Some things not to do. Don't pretend you know jargon you don't understand. That can get you into trouble. That working interview I got for that first job out of the classroom where I went and I did the job for 2 days. They paid me. Don't ever do a working interview they don't pay you for. That's a whole nother episode on its own. But don't pretend you don't know. Things like that. It got me in trouble, especially because they were like, oh, I'm going to be your SME on this. So you're going to come to me with questions. And I was like, what the heck's a SME? Thankfully, I Googled it and I had enough information. But in the moment, I was like, oh, yeah, totally. I got that. Yeah, no, it doesn't help your confidence. It's not going to help you complete the task. It's not going to help in any way. It would have been better if I just said, oh, okay, great. I haven't encountered SME yet. Can you please explain to me what a SME is? And then that would have saved me like an hour and a half of kind of just sitting there staring out the window and Googling to try and figure out what the heck I was supposed to be doing. Don't let the terminology intimidate you out of applying, though. Do it anyways. You'll figure it out later. Again, figure it out before an interview, though, but don't let the terminology intimidate you out of applying for the job. Don't assume everyone else actually knows what they're saying. I can't tell you how many times I've seen other people use terminology and I look at them like, that doesn't make any sense. You did not use that correctly. So just because somebody says something doesn't even mean that they know what it is. Don't use jargon just to sound smart. Be authentic. Be you. Speak as you normally speak. Don't try and force things, especially things you don't know, because it's going to be apparent that you don't know it. And don't stress about every acronym in a job posting. It's most likely not that big of a deal. Those big ones are probably what you're going to see more often. Other things might be industry specific to healthcare, to utilities, to retail. And so those are things that if you've never worked in that environment, it's understandable that you're not going to know what that acronym is. Try and look it up. If it's not easy to figure out what it is and it gets brought up in an interview, you can just ask for clarification then and say, I have worked in healthcare before. Can you please clarify that acronym? And then I will answer your question. And it's totally okay and appropriate to do that. They're going to see by your resume that you don't have healthcare experience. So it's just going to show them that you actually care to understand their industry and what you will be doing. And I think it goes a lot better than you would think it would, in an interview setting. Build your corporate vocabulary by starting with job posting for the roles you want. Document those unfamiliar terms, research the definitions. Join communities like the ID Den, where you can ask people, I saw this on a job description and I don't know what it means. And also observe how people are communicating and what acronyms are being used in those communities. Practice rewriting your teaching experience using those corporate terms. And I think one of the biggest ones, especially when it comes to corporate specific jargon rather than industry or role specific jargon, go to LinkedIn, look at posts, listen to podcasts, and start picking up on the different things that you'll hear a lot. I have even in the past done LinkedIn posts on, can we all agree to stop using low-hanging fruit? You're going to see things like that a lot because while it might be common, while it's used all the time everywhere in corporate, there's a lot of times these things bug people and they're not afraid to speak about it, especially on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn can also be kind of like a glossary gold for you. Let's start shifting your confidence. Instead of saying things like, I don't understand this language, I don't know what they're talking about, start shifting your mindset to, I'm learning the vocabulary of my new field. I'm learning the vocabulary of my new environment in corporate. Jargon is learned, it's not innate. And it doesn't always make sense at face value. Everyone has been confused by this stuff initially, even if they weren't teachers and they're coming from fresh out of college into a role, into an industry, there's going to still be things that are confusing to them. Your teaching terminology was once foreign to you too. So don't forget that everyone has to start somewhere and you'll get there, you'll learn it. In an interview, specifically, if there are things that come up that you don't know what it means, it's an acronym, it's a word, it's a phrase, you can simply ask, can you clarify what you mean by whatever they said? Again, this shows thoughtfulness, not ignorance. It is way better than nodding along and being confused and then giving them an answer that doesn't make any sense. And they're like, what the heck is this person talking about? They don't know what they're talking about. Speaking from being a former hiring manager, I would much rather say, sure, this is what I mean by this term, and have them actually give me a meaningful answer rather than them just trying to nod and speak and it doesn't make any sense. And most corporate folks love explaining acronyms anyways, so it's probably going to be a delight to them to explain you what low-hanging fruit means. And it demonstrates that you're comfortable asking questions, that you're going to be able to be a self-starter and take initiative and all of those other things that you might see in a job description because you're able to ask the questions in order to move forward and succeed in what you've been tasked with. Hopefully this episode helps a little bit clear up some of those things that you're going to see and empower you to know that you're not alone. Everyone's been there. Don't be afraid to speak up and ask questions. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this episode with your teacher friends who might also be considering a change. Connect with me on Instagram at the ID Den. Corporate jargon is gatekeeping, but not actual barriers to entry. You just got to figure out what it is. You're learning new vocabulary, not an entire new profession. So don't let the vocabulary feel like you don't know what you're doing. You do know what you're doing. You're not learning a complete new profession. You're learning how to apply a lot of those teaching principles in a new career path that might have other skills that need to be built as well. But a lot of it is just new terminology. Ask question, take notes, fake it till you make it to a degree. Again, don't just nod and smile and, oh yeah, I'll do that. And then you have no idea what a SOW is. SOW is a statement of work, by the way. The language will become second nature faster than you think. It was only a couple weeks of me jotting down terms in my notes in meetings before I started catching on and things started to make sense. And also the context was there. So don't let the terminology keep you stuck in fear.